Welcome to Ink and Magic, a podcast where we read and discuss the writing craft, world building, and romance of paranormal and fantasy novels.
If you love books with bite, set in worlds of magic and mayhem, then you're in the right place. My name's Nikisha Shanae. I go by Ines.
And I'm Leslye. I write as Elle Penelope. And welcome to the show.
What's up, Leslye?
What is up, Ines? We are back.
We are back for our first craft episode of the season. I love these because, I like talking about the nitty gritty of what it is that we do. I'm constantly running into people who it's funny. Okay, I'm going to finish my thought. It's very interesting to me because, again, we came up in the same school where this was things that we learned. We learned to break down stories, we learned plotting methods, and then we go through our careers, and then both of us started to write books around the same time. And I think we both were introduced to this word, pantser, around the same time.
Yeah, like what is that? I don't quite understand that.
It just throws me every time. I have to tell myself, don't give these people a whole diatribe of their plot is a noun. And it can be a verb. It is not a person. And pantser, I have to go through the whole diatribe because I started this soapbox spiel because I love to sit and talk about story. I love to talk about craft. And I feel that when people put themselves in these camps, well, I'm a pantser. I'm not going to sit down and outline. I'm like, okay, that's totally cool. But this is still our craft. We still should be studying story. And I meet people like that. I'm not saying every pantser is like that, but some of them that I meet are just like, they're averse to studying craft because they think it's going to make them a plotter.
Mm. Well, I mean, I think it's important to know your style, to know your process, and be comfortable with that, and try things. And if you've tried plotting ahead of time and it didn't work and it messed you up, then yeah, be a discovery writer. You can. It's perfectly fine to be a discovery writer or a gardener and these other terms, as opposed to an architect. Architect versus gardener is a nice one. But there is still structure involved. You're just being more intuitive. And I think there are very intuitive writers who are on that spectrum closer to the pantser side, and they're still applying structure. They've still incorporated it, but they've done it maybe subconsciously. And so it's not as formalized as, me with my spreadsheets and you with your like adherence to structure.
But I guess my confusion and it's the study of structure is what I'm interested in. And I feel like I think what I hear when people tell me that they don't want to become a plotter is they don't want to sit down and write the book before they outline the book before they actually sit down and write it because they feel like they're doing it twice. Totally get that. Totally understand that. I don't do that. And I'm a plotter and I often do not sit down and outline my books. But I feel like I can do it because I understand structure, because I study craft so hard. And that's where it turns me off, where I'm like, if you are the kind of person that's like, I'm not going to study, I think it's the student in me too. It's like, you're not going to study for the test?
Right.
What?
And I mean, not everyone has like 15 degrees like you do, Ms. Ines Johnson. She has a lot of degrees, y'all. She's been in school a lot.
I know.
It's just, it's a different perspective. I mean, I think that, whatever style you have, whether you're intuitive, whether you're a plotter or a gardener or whatever you are, studying craft is important, and it makes you a better writer. Like, even if you're not going to plot ahead of time or outline ahead of time, understanding what you are doing and understanding how are you going to revise then? What's your strategy for taking your first draft and making it the best final draft it can be? I personally agree with you on that. We're preaching to the choir here, but yeah. And I have found actually pantsers who want to become plotters because sometimes they recognize the utility in that, in terms of wanting to be professional and meet the deadlines if pantsing has not worked for them. I started out as a pantser. I didn't know the term yet, but I just was like, oh, I'm just going to sit down and write. And every day I was writing something different and it was going in different directions. And I had a huge mess at the end of the day. And I was like, oh no, this is not working for me. Let me find another way. And people like that, come over to the plot side.
Because if whether you pants or you plot, like we all run into this problem that we're going to talk about today. And that problem is the messy middle. How do we claw our way into and then out of the second act without being too bloody?
Yes, and not bloody ourselves, most of all.
True. And Leslye said something so interesting because I have all kinds of ideas and all kinds of crafty ways of solving this problem. But Leslye said, well, they should probably diagnose the problem first.
Right, yeah, like, I have a problem with the middle on every book that I write. As much as I plot, I get to the middle in my first draft, and the lovely, perfectly sculpted and structured plot that I have spent many weeks and months on falls apart, and I'm like, "Ah, why? Why?" And it's not always the same reason every time. So whenever you have a problem in your writing and any kind of block, any kind of being stuck is a problem that you need to diagnose because there's different kinds of problems and there are different kinds of solutions for this problem. So, yeah, step one, if you are encountering as a writer the messy middle, is okay, what is actually wrong? Why can't I, if can I not continue writing? What feels wrong? And sometimes that takes some intuition and some experience to really be able to diagnose it, and sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it takes another set of eyes or someone to bounce ideas off of. Like, how do you go about figuring out what's actually wrong before you can then fix it?
I think one of the ways that because again, I want to emphasize that Leslye, I've sat with Leslye as she writes her 10 and 12-page outlines, and I'm just like, you go, girl. And I do not call myself a pantser, but I don't do that. I might do some bullets. I might not do any of it at all. But I understand the structure of stories. And then when we come to the middle, I think one of the ways to I think the first thing to diagnose is, what are you writing? I am always writing romance. So there are there's scaffolding, if we're going to continue the architect metaphor, there's scaffolding in place to help me with that. Um, but before I get real specific about that, I think you said this to me once, Leslye. I think you started to talk to me about try-fail cycles.
Right.
And
And
that was really helpful to me to put that notion in my head.
yeah, so in Act 2, we've gotten past our inciting incident and we've broken into Act 2. We're into the new world if you're following something like the hero's journey. Um, and then the try-fail cycles. And I'm not sure where I got that from, but I'm sure I heard it from somewhere. But it's like the hero or heroine, your main character has to have a goal, right? And first of all, that could be a problem. I have many manuscripts where my protagonist did not have a strong enough goal or did not
Mhm.
have a goal at all. They were just
Right,
out there doing some stuff. And,
right.
and I see that in newer writers as well who I work with. So what is their goal? What are the obstacles? Just get down to the basics. And as they're trying to achieve the goal, they try to do something. Usually you break the big goal, the story goal, into smaller goals. What do they need in order to save their country from the Dark Lord? Well, they have to raise an army. They've got to find allies. How do they get that? That's the first thing. They try to do something. There are obstacles. They fail. If they succeed in everything they try to do, the story is very boring. So they have
And
to have some
over.
obstacles. Yeah,
Yeah.
and they have to have conflict. They have to have troubles.
So, in a nutshell, your middle, your second act really becomes a series of try-fail cycles. And
Mhm.
I think that what your responsibility is as an author is to craft, to design, like an obstacle course, design the obstacles that they're going to face as they're trying to get to their goal. Or we talked before about story question, and the story question is typically, will they achieve their goal?
Right.
And you have to put things in their way, some things that will make it seem like they get closer to it, but it's always a false goal. It's always a false victory. And some things where they literally you can knock them in the head and they fall down, which makes them question themselves, their power, and do I really want this? And if you start thinking about one of the things that we learned in film school, set pieces, if you start thinking of your try-fail cycles in terms of set pieces, then you're basically writing these mini stories.
Yeah, and that's a nice way to break it down. And, so because the second act is generally, if you're doing a three-act structure, twice as long as the first and the third. We get to the midpoint. We can talk about the midpoint too, but you have to fill it up with something. And sometimes it's difficult to know. Like I kind of know what the end is going to be. I know where they start, but that whole middle section
Mhm.
can be very difficult. So you have these built-in options where these like, yeah, these mini stories as they're building and you're increasing the tension until we get to the climax.
So a trifill cycle at its basics is a plan, an obstacle. I think that there needs to be a scene of growth and a setback. So, and I think that those orders can switch. So sometimes there's a growth scene and there can be positive or negative, and that's the reaction to the outcome of the obstacle.
Mm.
I think there's also a setback, and that setback can either be a false victory or an actual setback where they fell down on their backside. But I think it consists of those things. You have a plan, and the plan can change. The plan is definitely put in act sometime in act 1. They meet an obstacle, they either succeed against it or they fail against it, and they have a moment where they're either talking to somebody about how they felt about it, or they are thinking internally to themselves, "But oh man, this was really hard," or "Huh, brush my shoulders off. That was super easy." And that's the basis, I believe, of a try-fail cycle. Plan, obstacle goals, setback, and then you regroup. A regroup might be a new plan or a change in the plan, and then you do it again. Obstacle, goals, setback, regroup again and
Mhm.
again and again until you get to the final obstacle, which is, I think, when Act 3 begins.
And I often like kind of shortcut this with a yes, but or no, and.
Mm,
And I try to do that in every scene. That's one of the things I check for in revision. But you can also do it on the larger level. Like, okay, what is the goal? In this one try-fail cycle, they're trying to, convince this knight to go on the quest with them. So, I mean, how they figure out the knight's favorite food, they bake the favorite cake or something like, and that's their plan. So, do they succeed? Yes, but the knight eats the cake and has an allergic reaction. So that's another setback. Or no, the knight throws it in their face, and and they come up with a new plan. I think,
so yeah, I completely agree with that. The only thing that I would add to that is the reaction scene, the growth scene. How do they feel about it?
yeah, and that kind of helps them create the next goal, the next
Mhm,
plan for the next cycle.
mhm. Completely agreed. So, working off the basis of that try-fail cycle, I think you know that you need those and you want to start to put those in there. I also think that there's four types of obstacles. I think there are people obstacles where it could be an antagonist. You have your hero, and then you have an antagonist, someone who is not necessarily evil. They're just against whatever the hero's goal is. They want something different. So, um, my daughter, my daughter had to drive to California, and she
Right.
decided to buy a car off of Craigslist. I was her antagonist. So we won't go into that. But I love my daughter. Like, I'm not evil, but I thought she was evil for buying that car. Anyway. So one type of obstacle is an antagonist. And I also want to point out too that you can have subplots. So you have your hero, and your hero might have an antagonist, but then you might have some supporting characters. I'm gonna have some sidekicks who are going on side quests as well, and they could have obstacles as well for other tri-fail cycles. So obstacle one can be an antagonist. You can also have physical obstructions, anything that literally stands in the way. It could be the car breaks down. It could be if you're trying to cross a bridge in an action adventure and the bridge collapses, something like that. So antagonist, physical obstruction, inner or psychological problems. You could doubt yourself. There's been a lot of psychological dramas where the hero is actually their own antagonist, but it's really still an inner psychological issue. And then the last one is acts of nature or acts of a supernatural force like twisters or unfortunately hurricanes, which we're dealing with right now. But I think that you can keep having the same obstacle happen over and over again. You can keep coming up against an antagonist. You can keep coming up against different physical obstructions. Or in one try-fail cycle, maybe you're doubting yourself and it's an inner psychological problem where you are self-sabotage, your character is self-sabotaging. In another try-fail cycle, maybe it's an act of God. I think that's another way for us to use these try-fail cycles.
And I think you probably should be mixing them up. I mean, I
Mhm.
think if it's all the same over and over again, it gets to be one note. So you might have a really strong antagonist who's throwing up obstacles, but if you don't have that inner character growth, that arc, that character, that protagonist is facing down their fears and growing as a person, then you're missing an opportunity to strengthen the story. In general, I like to, and especially with romance, or even, I don't always write pure romances, but I generally have a romantic plot line, even in my fantasies. And the only way that the protagonist can answer the story question, can actually win their final external goal, is by conquering the internal issue, by having that character growth in a positive growth arc. So I feel like it's stronger when they're intertwined and when one is the cause for the other one.
Speaking of romance, a lot of times in a romance, the hero and the heroine are each other's antagonists. So I always love that. But
Yeah.
the structure for the trifle cycle in a romance, in my opinion, you can look at the save the cat structure, which is going to be the fun and games, the getting to know you moments. But I love the way Lisa Daly talks about this on her YouTube channel. She calls it the 3 dates in a disaster. I just love that. Love it, love it, love it. Because think about it. Even though you might have in a romance, you might have your characters going on actual dates. But if
Mhm.
you're going on a date, you're going on a date to get to know somebody. So if you have like an opposites attract romance, like they're probably not going on dates. Maybe they're working together in an office romance, but every time they're working on a project, that's an air quotes date where they're working on this aspect of the project and she is being all strict and he's being all loosey goosey about it. But there's a try fail cycle in that they're trying to accomplish just one task on the project that they're working together and it goes kaplooey. And then another one, maybe they're present in another try fail cycle, maybe they're doing a presentation, an initial presentation to their boss, and again it goes kaplooey. Or he takes up for her when the boss is mean or something. Again, we're having these try fail cycles with different obstacles, and you can see the growth. And growth isn't always going up on a continuous angle. Sometimes it goes down, comes back up, maybe dips again, and then goes up. So that's one of the ways that we can start to think about try-fail cycles when we have a romance.
Yeah, and I love that you told me about the 3 dates in a disaster, and it makes a lot of sense to me for that fun and game section, which is really the first half of Act 2. And then we get to our midpoint, which is one of the things that I like to point to. James Scott Bell's Write Your Novel from the Middle is one of my foundational books. If only a handful of writing books, that's definitely one of them.
Mhm.
And I'm in it all the time. It's a very thin, short book, but it
Oh,
helps.
best ones.
Yeah, like you get one good idea from it. And it doesn't take a lot of pages to give you that good idea. And one other thing I learned is that the stakes should always be death. Uh,
Mhm.
so it could be psychological death, it could be physical death, it could be professional death. Those are the 3 types of death stakes. So in a romance, psychological death is if you let this perfect partner slip out of your fingertips, you could suffer psychological death. Um,
Mhm.
a, Professional death is like a detective. If they don't solve the case, they're going to suffer. And they might not lose their job, but at the core of them, it's like they need to solve this case. They need to have
Mhm.
justice. And then, of course, there's the physical death. So that was another good point. But the midpoint specifically, and the
Mhm.
mirror moment,
Yeah.
and he aligns the two of those things. And I know that you are a big fan of the mirror moment, right?
Everything that I write has a mirror moment. So James Scott Bell has this transformation arc. So you start with the initial condition, which is how they are in the ordinary world. This is how you introduce them. That midpoint. So you have the midpoint, and then at the end you have the transformation. But the midpoint, see, this is why I think everybody should have had a film and television education. Like that's what we should go to school for. Because what James Scott Bell did, how he discovered the midpoint was there were these things called VHS tapes.
Oh,
And
back in the day.
back in the day when movies were actually 90 minutes long, and I think he got a hunch or something, and he would fast forward to 45 minutes and he would watch that scene. And what he kept seeing over and over again, y'all know I love a pattern, is he kept seeing the characters have a reflective moment. Either they were looking in the mirror, they were talking to someone and that person was saying something reflective, or they were having an introspective moment where they could see where they were right now in the middle of their story, in the middle of their goal. They saw who they were from the initial condition, all the changes that they made, and then they saw who they needed to become in order to transform and actually get the goal. And they took a moment to think to themselves, do I want this? Can I do this? Should I go ahead? Can I go back? And
Mm.
that's your mirror moment.
Or also, like, what are the forces arrayed against you? So there's two kinds. There's the internal, who am I? Who am I going to become? And the external, can I defeat this foe that is so difficult and so much stronger than I am? And if you and it's, he found that it was always in the middle,
Mhm.
or almost always in the middle of the movie, in the middle of the book. He would turn to the middle pages, literally open the book to the middle, and it was there, and people didn't know they were doing it, but that's kind of that intuitive sense of storytelling, and we've
Mhm.
incorporated it, and we've so we have it in our minds. And then sometimes when a movie doesn't work and the structure is off, it's because we were expecting this intuitively and it's not there, and we're missing it, and there's something that's gone from that experience.
So Leslie and I talk about romance a lot, but you can see different kind of triphile cycles in other genres as well. Like for example, like a mystery. I like to think of Agatha Christie. I never read this from her. I've only heard it from other people, and other people have said that the Agatha Christie formula for mysteries is three suspects and then the actual killer. And I think that trucks with Three Dates and a Disaster.
Mm,
You have an initial theory in act one after the body drops or the crime has been committed, and you start to investigate. You investigate suspect one, that's a trifail cycle. You investigate suspect two, another trifail cycle, suspect three, another trifail cycle. And then the killer might be one of those three, or it might be a huge twist and it's someone else, but they've already been introduced. And I think that's another way that we can do this and make sure that our middle is fast paced and exciting.
mhm. And yeah, that number 3, there's
Mhm.
these numbers that just make sense for humans. I don't know why it's baked into our DNA, certain numbers like that, but 3 feels right. If it's just 2, or, and there's gonna be more sometimes, but, like, we kind of settle back to 3 all the time, which I think is really interesting.
I think one of the ways, because I like writing shorter. Leslie writes massive books. But I think one of the ways that if you're trying to increase page count or you're trying to just go deeper into your story, I think that's when the subplots and the side quests, that's when that comes. And they need their own trifail cycles as well, interspersed through the story.
Right, yeah. And yeah, in terms of like a middle or a second act, sometimes I do have to beef up my subplots. And I remember I was doing a lot of research on like what are subplots? Why do we have them? It's not just to make the story longer, because that's not really my goal. It's like I want to tell the story in as few words as possible. Sometimes that few words is 150,000, but not an extra word should be there. And subplots are really meant to reflect the main plot, to show
Yeah.
some other aspect of it, to either reinforce or
Mhm.
contrast it. And so you have your main protagonist and their goal. And then if it's a side character, if maybe it's the villain story, maybe it's, what's happening elsewhere, but that should still reflect or contrast with the main plot and deepen it in that way. So you're telling a more full and more rich story.
I think another way that we can use the subplots is Blake Snyder in his second Save the Cat book, which I think is Save the Cat Goes to the Movies or Save the Cat Strikes Back. I get them confused. It's in one of these. But he has this framework that he used for Act One, Act Two, Act Three. And he calls it the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. But I also think this can work in Act Two as a whole, or it can work for the subplots. Because I think subplots work best when they are some kind of in alignment with the character's main goal or with the main theme of the book. So, if you are looking at this, you can have a subplot, which could be the main character on kind of on a bit of a side quest, like let me stop over here and check on this person. I think what you can do with that, you can have a thesis that can be in alignment where we have some minor obstacles that are happening, and so you're testing out. The hero believes that they are going to, I don't know, that they are going to. What am I writing right now? I have to think of. I didn't come up with an immediate example, but
So many books.
I know there's so, written so many books. So I in one of the books that I'm writing, my heroine thinks that the hero killed her father because that's the evidence that she has. So she, of course, is not going to be talking to the person who she thinks killed her father. She could be talking to some of his allies and some of his his enemies. And so that could be a side quest where she's getting information where it's not aligning with what she thought. So she has a thesis that this guy killed my father, but the evidence from these other people who were like on the scene isn't lining up. So now she has an antithesis. So the first trifail cycle was the thesis, and now the antithesis is, what if he didn't kill my father? So it's the opposite. And then she goes down that trajectory and she finds some evidence that looks like, this is damning again. Maybe he did actually do it. And then we arrive at the third trifail cycle, which is the synthesis, which is the truth. So she arrives at the truth, where I'm not going to spoil it because actually some of you might actually read this book, which might not come out for another year or two, but she comes at what the actual truth of the matter is as she's going along this side quest. So you can use other characters to help you to explore a thesis, like what you think is the truth, the antithesis, which is the opposite, and then the synthesis, which is what really happened or what lesson they truly need to learn for your trifail cycles.
Yeah, and these are all techniques that, you have in the toolbox so that when you diagnose the problem that you're having with the second act, with the messy middle, then be like, okay, is it a problem with a subplot? Sometimes it is. I've had that issue where either I didn't have a subplot or it was weak. It wasn't enhancing the main plot or complicating it. It wasn't, the subplot also shows different characters dealing with a very similar problem or the same problem in different ways. So you get more information about the main character, or the main character gets more information that they can then use. And maybe it's the mirror. Maybe you don't have a strong enough internal arc. There's no internal conflicts happening. And that could be, the thing that you diagnose. So as you kind of listen and pull stuff in that you can use in the future, that can also help. Like studying craft, another reason why I do it is it gives me more tools to then identify the problems that I have and give me more ideas for solutions.
Yeah. So I mostly read and craft books. So I don't have a lot of advice outside of romance, mysteries, or thrillers. And thrillers are similar to a mystery, except I call it 3 bombs and an explosion. Because and again, the stakes are going up and up and up. So there might be like a little fizzle, then there might be like a firecracker, then there's like one of those rockets, and then a big old boom. So I think in a thriller, the stakes are always going up, 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 up as you're trying to figure out not necessarily who's doing it, because you probably know who. You're trying to figure out why they're doing it and how to stop them.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that, something like fantasy and sci-fi, even though fantasy, like that's a genre, it's not a structural genre in the same way that mysteries have a structure, thrillers, romances have a structure. A fantasy can be is a milieu, really, that any structure, any of those above structures work in. Like there's quests, but there's you could have fantasy romance, your story, your actual structure could be a mystery or a thriller or a combination, or just an adventure story. So yeah, that's just depending on what genre you're writing and what kind of genre it is. Different genres will lend themselves to certain aspect. If you're calling it 3 dates and a disaster, or 3 bombs and an explosion, or 3 suspects and a red herring and the killer, yeah. It's just these are good ways to. It's also very important to know your genre and know the expectations of the genre, because that can help you diagnose the problem as well. Because maybe it's a genre problem, like you've waited until 75% in your romance to have the hero and heroine meet. That could be a problem.
That's really bad. But didn't what was that movie, Ocean's 11?
People do it. Oh yeah, Julia Roberts doesn't come into Ocean's 11 until like an hour and a half into the movie.
It's crazy. Yeah.
So it's possible, but you probably can't do it.
No.
I mean, I'm being too negative. I don't know.
No. So guys, we hope that this is helping you to think about when you do get to the middle and it does get messy, that you can pull on these tools that Leslye and I use over and over again to diagnose and then to fix the problem so that our middles don't sag.
Yeah, and I have written a post on this. It's actually one of my more popular Substack posts. It's called The Messy Middle. We will link to it in the show notes. And I know Ines has lots of great material on all kinds of plotting topics on her Substack as well. So we'll link to both of those because, yeah, she's a fountain of information on very organized information. Mine is rather disorganized at times, but
So, with that done, with every author's middle saved, Leslye, let's talk about what we are reading or watching that we are loving this week.
So I'm not a huge reality TV watcher, but I have recently started watching Love is Blind. The most current season as we're recording this, which is like season 5 or 7, or I don't know, but it's the DC season, which was why it was of moderate interest because it's local. Although none of those people sound like they're from DC. They're the DC people that move here. They're not from here. They don't have accents from here. I don't have an accent either, but I'm from here. Trust me. I'm from Maryland. Anyway, Love is Blind is a crazy show. It's highly entertaining. And I I mean, I've heard about people have been talking about it for a long time. I just never bothered to to watch it until now. And yeah, I almost wonder, okay, so obviously they meet, these people are dating, they can't see each other. I'm several episodes in. My favorite part is when they get engaged after this tiny short period of knowing each other, which wasn't exactly sure how long it was. But I found out how long it was. It almost ruined the show. So I'm not even going to say it, because if you have watched the show blindly, thinking that it was weeks or months that they've been talking, it is not. Anyway, my favorite part is when they finally have the reveal where they see each other. They can only apparently see each other once they have been engaged, once they've agreed to marry each other. And I'm putting marry in quotes
So wait,
because
are they talking to each other?
they talk to each other through a wall. They can't, for a period of time. They winnow down the choices. I think they start with
Oh.
all 15 choices. They winnow them down until the person they're going to marry.
Oh,
And then they
wow.
can see each other. And I love seeing whether they're like excited or disappointed by how they actually look.
Are there
Um,
reasons to be disappointed?
well, some people might say that they look a certain way and maybe they don't look exactly that way, or maybe the person had an expectation
Oh.
based on their voice or other things about them that that don't match up with the reality. There's height issues, you don't in our culture, it is
Yeah.
often unusual for a woman to be taller than a man, or even to be like the same height, or even like a half an inch or an inch taller.
Yeah,
Like that
yeah.
can be uncomfortable for both people. So there's, weight, there's race and and
Oh,
ethnicity that they might not know. Like it is fascinating. And I might go back and watch some of the other seasons just as a social experiment. But if you love romance, and as I do, like when you see that there's actually a connection and they see each other and they light up and they're super excited and they run toward each other and hug and kiss, versus the people who look at each other and like, and they know they're on TV and so they're smiling. They're like, oh yeah, hi, oh yeah. There's a big difference, and you can tell, and it's fascinating.
Oh
And then
my.
apparently they go out into the real world and have lots of drama. I'm just getting to that point. We've just gotten out of the pods on the season as I'm watching it. So I'm having a great time. It's interesting. It is ridiculous and wild. And I don't know that I should do some research on do any of these couples actually make it from the past 5 to 7 seasons that I have not been watching. Seems
I think
unlikely.
I think the very first and this is usually how these things work. I think the very first couple, who I think was a Black woman and a white man,
Hmm. They made it.
I think so, 'cause I think that's why it was so popular because of their chemistry. But I
Uh,
heard of this show.
right. Yeah, I've heard of it. But I don't, I tend not to watch dating shows because I get embarrassed for them.
Yeah, that secondhand embarrassment. Oh,
Yeah, and that's real for
no.
me. I had that. And I have it in this. I'm cringing half the time. But it's those little moments when there's a couple of connections that you're like, oh, I really want this couple to make it. They have so much chemistry, and they seem like they really like each other, and like, yeah. And then I'm sure some of them will fall apart, and some of them might make it. So maybe,
Yeah, I
So
like
yeah.
my guaranteed happily ever after.
Well, that's why we read romance.
That's why I read romance.
So Ines, what are you reading or watching lately?
I am watching. Oh, I binged watched. I sat down to watch one episode of Nobody Wants This.
On
'Cause I was
Netflix.
very confused. I kept seeing posts of people saying nobody wants this, and I'm like, what is happening? Like, why would you even title it that?
Yeah.
Nobody wants this. I don't because it was perfect. And I don't throw that word around a lot.
Right?
But Kristen Bell just makes the smartest decisions. Kristen Bell, who was forever Veronica Mars, she starred in this as a messy, messy, messy California girl.
She does mess really well.
She does mess so well. And she is very happily married. But yeah, she does mess so well, and she and her sister, who have the best toxic relationship I've ever seen written, they have a podcast, a dating podcast, where they're basically talking about their lives. I think it was mirrored a little bit off of a podcast that I just heard about called Call Her Daddy.
Oh, because Kamala was on that, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
So, but again, I started to see other things, but this was written by a reality show star.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Huh.
yeah, yeah.
Well, they do learn about scripting by being on reality shows because they're all scripted.
Yes. That is not bitter film students saying this. But okay, so she Kristen Bell's character is an absolute messy dater, and but it was so wonderful to see how, I will tell you right now, that her character grew through this,
Ooh.
because you could see from the very first frame her making rash, quick decisions based upon guys, self-sabotaging, looking for the flaws, and this is where it sounds like a joke. She meets a rabbi,
It does sound like a joke.
and they walk into a bar.
Oh my gosh.
I'm kidding. But they fall, and you see it. They fall hard, and you know these two people belong together. But she's basically, they keep calling her a shiksa. I didn't know what that, and now I know what that word means, and it is not a polite word. Oh my goodness. She's a shiksa, and he is a rabbi up for like lead rabbi of his temple.
Okay. So no shiksas allowed.
And you were like, how is this going to
Romantic
work?
conflict.
So much conflict. So much conflict.
Wow.
Because it even looks like they're so opposite too, but they click. You just see it click, and nobody is for this relationship. Even at some points, Kristen character is not for this relationship. She's like, this cannot work. This cannot be real. And it worked. Like I sat down to watch one episode, and I devoured the show. It was laugh out loud funny. It was so real. There were side quests happening that were still engaging. Yeah, I highly, highly, highly recommend it.
Well, it's definitely on my list, and I take those recommendations seriously. I think it's really interesting that people who shouldn't like that kind of romantic conflict, at least in my life, in my limited experience, some of my most powerful relationships have been with people that were it shouldn't have like there was a heavy romantic conflict, whether it's like religion or
Mhm.
like just different things that make it so that you should not work at all. And that's been the most like intense relationships. So I think there's
Mhm.
something there. And I love to write enemies to lovers. I didn't have any enemies in my actual life, but that sort of
That
opposites
vibe.
attract.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will tell you, I believe in this relationship, this fictional relationship, but my romantic heart does not think it will work. Like in the future,
Mm.
they're gonna break up. I
Mhm.
really think so. I'm like, this cannot work.
'Cause there are inherent problems with opposites attracting. You're opposites for a reason, and after the HEA, regular life sets in. But as romance writers, we don't really focus on that. Maybe
We don't do that.
we take
No.
you up to the wedding, maybe the first few years, and you're on your own after that.
They're on their own, and I hope it works in the fictional land.
Mhm.
But oof.
I guess that's what women's fiction is for, the rest of the story.
Yeah, exactly. That's what you go to women's fiction. You start with YA, then you
Yeah.
come over to Romancelandia, and then you retire into women's fiction landia.
Right, with sprinkles of romance still there, I think,
Yeah,
or that's one progression, so.
that is life. Guys, thank you so, so much for joining us today. Please do let us know what you think. You can leave a comment on YouTube with your thoughts on the episode. Please do share it with a friend who loves romance. And please don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
And you can always check out our book schedule on our website, inkandmagic.net, and read along with us with the Nalini Singh's Side Changeling series, Side Changeling Trinity series, Trinity Season 2. We will see you the next time.
Bye, guys.
Bye.